Hey everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back, the dedicated YouTube channel for the adult survivors here in New Zealand and globally. We know there are many of us, we know the numbers aren't disseminating or decreasing in any way. So this is one small attempt at trying to give you a safe place to land and to feel some support and resource. As with all shows, this is a trigger warning attached, and the reason for that is because I don't want you feeling uncomfortable or upset. If you start to feel triggered, go to the show notes below and you'll be guided to some help and resource. We have a fabulous guest today, and I'm so thrilled to introduce her to you. Meet Rachel Vaughan. She comes all the way from Adelaide, so she's 2.5 hours behind us in terms of time over in Australia. And welcome to the show, Rachel.
Lovely to see you, Gloria. Thank you for having me on.
Well, you're very welcome. I know our audience are going to be thrilled that I finally got you on. The intent has been there. So Rachel, we, as with all shows, we tend to start at the beginning and just as little or much as you're comfortable to share about your experience of child sexual abuse. And then we go wherever we land, basically. So wherever you're comfortable to.
Absolutely. So my name is Rachel Vaughan. I grew up in Adelaide in South Australia. Very interesting sort of background with my father. So my father's grandfather, my great-grandfather, Joseph Wright, was the Grand President of the Grand Lodge. He was a very high-up Freemason, and that certainly filtered down to my father, he was a Freemason and a Satanist, Rosicrucian as well, which is the Scottish version, and my maiden name is McIntyre. Member of the Golden Dawn sect, so that's Aleister Crowley's sect. So he had a large number of friends, almost all of them were pedophiles. He seems to have been an ASIO operative. He was in the Navy, in the reserves, but I've not been able to get even his reserve number. I can't get anything from National Archives or the Defence Archives. Apparently he didn't exist as far as they're concerned. He went off on Navy exercises all the time. And because he was a telecommunications officer, worked for Telecom here, which is the main telco, and he used to wiretap people. That was his job. He used to listen in on phone calls and called himself a spy and a special friend to police. There's so many different elements that sort of point towards him being an ASIO operative. I started being abused as a toddler, and I started seeing horrific things like dead bodies and things from a very, very small age. Basically, he trafficked me through a series of tunnels as well. I saw rituals. There was a bunker and a hidden cellar beneath my childhood home in Edwardstown of South Australia. And I've actually proven the existence of the bunker and the tunnels in my childhood area. I put out a video on my BitChute channel if you just look up my name, and that's on my Rumble channel as well. I published that in January of this year, and it's extensive. I've got a PDF with all of my evidence as well. I've proven the existence of the tunnels and the bunker. Still, my childhood property hasn't been investigated properly by police to find the cadavers that he buried there. It's a very, very convoluted story. So he had impunity from police. It didn't matter what I did since 2006, I've been making official allegations, and I did that right up until 2018 when I gave up bothering with the police or any authorities over police, including politicians and all the investigative bodies that are supposed to sort of step in when police act in a corrupt manner. And then I just proved the existence of the abuse and got my medical records and did all of the things that I needed to do to substantiate what happened to me. And basically still waiting for some sort of justice. But I've got my own justice because I've done all the investigation and I've proven what I needed to prove. Yeah. So it's been a long journey.
Don't you find it ironic, Rachel? And thank you so much. Heart with you. Don't you find it almost ironic that as an adult survivor, it is still incumbent upon you to have to explain, justify, rationalize, reason, detail what happened, when the focus should actually be on the perpetrators and the abusers? And
it's one of the most frustrating things that I've found about the whole process. And it's not just having to prove these things yourself, it's actually having to dumb down your experiences for people who've had an easy life, because they can't deal with it. And that drives me crazy. I even put a post about that yesterday. I was sharing my dear friend Max Lowen's testimony to the 50 Voices of Ritual Abuse documentary, and I just wrote a little blurb about that. Exactly. It is maddening, because we're the ones who've been injured, but we have to make it soft and gentle for the other people who've had these easy lives. And I don't want to sound bitter, but you can't help but get frustrated.
Yeah, I understand. And I think too, we also, it feels incumbent upon us, and for our beautiful survivors watching, hello and welcome to you. You guys will get it as well. It's what I call the Darvo technique. We are denied that this happened. We are attacked because it can't go any further. Now, that could be our mental health is attacked, or our credibility, or our sanity, whatever. The R is it's in reversing the order of the victim, ourselves, and the offender, the abusers. So it's quite cleverly done, and it works, and it works every time, and it seems to still be working, Rachel.
Yeah. And I've had all of those. I've had all the false memory rubbish, and it's funny because I've got two siblings who also were abused by my father, or our father. And so when the false memory thing doesn't work, because hey, I've got two siblings who've had the same abuse, then they'll go to mass hysteria, which I find quite funny. I shouldn't find it funny, but I do, because it's so illogical and ridiculous. And just to clarify, my two siblings who also made allegations against our father, they're 19 and 18 years older than me, and weren't in the house when I was a child. So we're spanning, two generations. And also there's a fourth sibling who was murdered, supposedly suicided, whose psychiatric notes stated that she was seeing her psychiatrist because of issues around incest with her father, or our father. So that's 4 of his 7 children that have made allegations.
And what happened with you may not be comfortable to share, but I'm just wondering generically, what happened with the allegations? Were they able to be used at all?
Well, interestingly, my brother, Andrew McIntyre, was able to get a notorious pedophile, one of my father's very close friends, a man called Anthony Munro, incarcerated, and he was put away for 10 years for what he did to Andrew and another man who doesn't like to be named when they were children. And those abuses occurred just prior, or just around the time of the Beaumont disappearance. And Munro was involved with the Beaumont disappearance. And my father has said that Munro brought the dead Beaumont children in the boot of a car to the childhood property I was talking about, with the tunnels and the bunker, on the day they went missing. And he said that in a video statement that's out there. That's actually on my YouTube channel. So there is so much evidence, Gloria. This is what's so frustrating about this particular case. There is so much evidence. It took 10 years of campaigning. Andrew, my sister Ruth, and myself constantly campaigning and pushing and pressuring police and politicians to actually have Munro put away. That's not why he got put away. He got put away because he was over in Cambodia funding orphanages. And there were vigilantes over there that were after him, and he was safer here in the jail.
Wow, that just all, eh? The Beaumont children, and for those who are in the States or the UK, you may not be aware of it. It was a case where it was three siblings.
3 children.
Yeah. Beautiful young kids, eh? And they went to a beach. over in Australia. Do you remember the name of the beach? Was it
Glenelg Beach? It's a palindrome. There's something significant about the name as well. Yeah.
Okay. And they went there for a day and they were never seen again. And Munro, as you're saying, has admitted that he took those children.
Well, he hasn't admitted, but my father put him in it. And my sister and brother were witness to Munro coming back to the house that day, hysterical. My father was covered in blood and sand. There was sand and blood in Munro's car. There's just so much. So they've both put that out there.
And the police are aware of that?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
And have that poor family, have the parents been able to get any closure? Or
they're both now deceased. Yeah. They've waited. So, there's one particular major crime detective that I have a real issue with who sat on that case for nearly 50 years.
Wow.
And it's really interesting. Whenever there's any reporting on that in the only main newspaper in Adelaide, there's only one reporter who ever reports on it as well. So they've got it sewn up, tied up, case closed. And that's one of the things that this particular major crime detective said to me when I rang one time. I said, why aren't you looking into this? The case is closed and that's the end of it. And that's what he said to me. And I actually made a complaint to the Police Complaints Authority about that. And I made many complaints. And that didn't go anywhere. And then that particular institution or board was disbanded because of allegations of corruption in the Police Complaints Authority itself. I mean, that's just what they do here. And then they take all those people who are corrupt from that particular body and then they employ them elsewhere. So they took them out of there and then they took, one of them was employed at the police ombudsman office, and then my case was given to him. Yeah, just unbelievable. Yeah.
So, the fact that this goes to the highest levels and it's refuted and it's kind of rejected out of hand because there is obviously a knowing.
Yeah.
It just, it leads us, doesn't it, as survivors to wonder, why would anyone ever try and speak up? Because the exhaustion you must experience after a decade or more of trying to get your voice heard and the truth to be acknowledged, because you've got 3 other siblings, one who is no longer with you, who substantiate.
Yeah. And medical records to substantiate, and I've got all these records of these tunnels and this bunker and the other bunkers in the area, which I've done extensive research on and had a lot of help from other people give me research on. Yeah, it's quite unbelievable, really. But I think that there are so many. So my father was a blackmailer, so he used me in his blackmail operations. I was one of his honeypots, and I was filmed and photographed with people who were clearly out of it. I mean, some of these men and women were drugged, or I don't know what they'd done to them, but they would wake up with a start because they would be jabbed or something, and flashes would go off. And so it's interesting, when my brother finally had an interview at the Major Crime Department after 10 years of asking for one, and they had to give him one because he was just about to have this conviction done against Anthony Munro. So they couldn't not give him an interview. They had to finally do it. He offered them a brief of evidence, an inch thick of paperwork and evidence, and they refused it. And the only thing they really wanted to ask him about in that interview was these old milk canisters that used to be these large, I mean, this is going back a way, these large canisters that milk used to be apparently supplied to people with. And my father had bitumised the outside of them so they couldn't rust. And he had his blackmail material in them. And that's the only thing they wanted to ask my brother about in that interview.
Goodness me. So where is this kind of left you? How does this impact today, Rachel?
Well, I mean, I'm in a good place now, I suppose, because I've put so much evidence out there and I feel completely vindicated. And, I've learned so much through that process. I'm an optimist. So even with all the frustration, with all of the corruption, I feel I feel like I've gone through that process. I've come out a better person. I still want to see some justice, especially considering I cannot imagine how many. Well, I know there's a lot that have come forward to me that have also gone through the same process that I've gone through. Australia's rife with this sort of abuse, who've not had the strength or the conviction or the ability or the help that I've had to get my evidence out. So I want some justice for them too. So I'm not going to stop trying to get that justice. But I'm certainly, it's interesting. I don't feel the need for it all to come out to the mainstream media, because even if it did now, I don't think anybody would really trust it. I certainly don't watch the news anymore.
No.
So, it's out there, and I'm quite satisfied with that. And now I'm focusing more on things that I really do love to do. So yeah. I've done all the hard work.
Yeah, you certainly have, and I'm so grateful you managed to survive.
Yeah,
you did. And what if okay, and you can always say no to anything I ask you. Was your mother aware of what was happening, or do you believe she had any kind of knowing? Or
I really feel for her, because she was also a victim. So these creatures, like my father, they will choose particular women to breed with. Now, it's interesting because I had the theta programming, the psychic programming, and my mother's side of the family is very psychic. Also, there's a thing with eye color. So if you've got green eyes, and you also have what's called central heterochromia, which is a different color at the center of the iris, that's usually an indicator for psychic ability. So my mother had that eye color. I have, my sisters have. So she was selected, and he bred with her, but she was 16 and a half years younger than him, roughly, and was about 21 when she had her first child with him. She didn't know he had a wife and 3 children already. He had another child later on that's proven, the rest of the family who doesn't believe that this even exists, or they're hiding, covering it up because it's benefited them. They all know that he had a 7th child with this person that lived a street away from us, and that was in the 80s. So, he's was a compulsive liar and a perpetual liar. But she came out of a difficult situation. Her situation growing up wasn't great. Then she got stuck with him. He had an ability to induce her hypnotically with a click of his fingers and a few words. And so she didn't have much chance, basically. She certainly tried to help me. She's written statutory declarations. He ran me over with his car at one point, trying to kill me. And she came home as he was pulling me out from underneath the car. So she wrote a statutory declaration to say that she was a witness to that. Neither of them took me to the hospital. And I had to actually console him as he whispered to me, "I wanted to kill you, but I couldn't because I love you too much." So that's the sort of childhood I had. I had this psychotic father, and I was having to placate and console him after his attempt to kill me. Like I said, I feel very sorry for my mother. I don't have contact with her now, because part of my healing journey is that I needed to let that go. But I certainly don't wish anything ill of her. I don't.
No. And I think, for survivors watching as well, these situations for us are so multi-layered and have such complexities. It's really, really challenging when people who aren't survivors or don't have experience of this to actually grasp that it's not that we love someone and hate another parent. It's that we were in and still will be around them in survival mode because we've been conditioned to make sure their needs are met above ours at all times.
Yes.
So it's very hard, in my humble opinion, to feel that you have autonomy as an adult if you are in the midst or amongst your parents who were complicit, whether knowingly or not, in your abuse. So I think it can take us straight back to being.
Thank you for sharing that, Gloria, because I have never heard anybody say it so succinctly before. It makes so much sense. I knew I had to let that go for my own benefit, but to have it spoken so clearly makes a lot of sense, and it will probably help a lot of people to hear it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think too I'm just using this as a generic term. As you know, I've experienced satanic ritual abuse myself, and a lot of mind control. But I just know if I'm in the company, my father's deceased, but of a certain family member, and I don't actually willingly ever see them, I can immediately feel almost like I'm not me anymore.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's how powerful that training was. I
Mm.
understand what you're saying, Rachel, and I'm so grateful for your truth, because we get many people who just don't know how to make sense of it, and it's just layers upon layers of all of this, and it renders us almost incapacitated at times,
Yeah.
even though we are highly intelligent, skilled, and have coping mechanisms that most CEOs could only dream of attaining. And that's a point for you survivors watching.
Yeah.
When you doubt yourselves, I want you to remind yourselves of this. Not only do you have amazing conflict resolution, you also have people management.
Yeah.
You're actually able to manage highly stressful environments. You following me, survivors? So, Rachel, wouldn't you agree?
100%. 100%. And it's interesting, I've talked about this in interviews before, that dissociative aspect of having such severe trauma, and I am not advocating for trauma in any way, but like I said, I'm an optimist, and I try and find some sort of positive in anything.
Yeah.
Being dissociative can be of benefit in some areas if you need to concentrate a great deal. I can be in a very loud room full of people, and I can concentrate and write, and I can do whatever I need to do. I can be totally concentrated on what I'm doing, because I can just tune it out. It's like it doesn't exist.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So dissociation, and for those that aren't quite aware of the term, and I found this little phrase, and I think you'll love it, Rachel. Dissociation is leaving the body when you can't physically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that
Absolutely.
beautiful?
Yeah.
So that's you leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you can't physically do that. How old were you, would you say, when the abuse finally stopped with your dad? We know that conditioning goes on forever, but in terms of the sexual, physical abuse, how old would you
I
know?
was in my mid-teens.
Mid-teens, yeah. Okay. And, of course, I can imagine the fear and perhaps not being able to discuss. Did you have anybody at school that you were close to, or anyone?
I was always very worried for
Yeah.
my friends. So no, I kept it quiet from them. I did tell a teacher in primary school about a child that was being kept under the house. But that didn't go very far, because when I got taken up to the principal, I just got terrified and said I'd lied.
Yeah. How is that for you today, Rachel? That just being aware of what your father was doing and keeping those children, and how was that for you?
It's still really hard to cope with, because I know it's still happening, and it doesn't seem to matter how many people speak up about it. And now it's much more state sanctioned. So we've got the Department of Child Protection doing this stuff now, and peddling children and trafficking them. That's probably even more horrifying. My experience, there was a chief inspector of police involved with my abuse as a child, a very good friend of my father, who's also a convicted pedophile. There's actually 3 of my father's very close friends who are now convicted pedophiles. So that's more evidence. It's probably, it's just still happening. It's just on a bigger scale, and it's more out there. So it's still constantly traumatizing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so sorry. And that the thing is that you're holding up the light for others to feel that there's hope, because the hope is that you came through, you emerged through, and you've never stopped advocating and trying to support. So thank you so much for that. That's amazing.
Oh, likewise, darling. And thank you for having platforms like this, because again, people need to speak, but there are very few platforms that allow you to do it.
I know. But you know, to me, the light that needs to shine frees the souls that are so trapped, and even the beautiful survivors out there who can't yet find the courage. You know, we see you and we stand with you. I think as you kind of had indicated, was your sister who was hospitalised or ended up not surviving, was she younger than you, or was she also an older sibling?
She was the eldest sibling.
She was the eldest.
Yeah.
And so by the time you were born, I guess most of your siblings were well into their teenage years.
Yeah. So my father's first three children, gosh, they were 13, 12 and 9, I think, or something like, no. They're only about a year and a half between them. His poor first wife, she just kept getting pregnant so quickly. So when I was born, most of the first three children had moved out, and then I have two other siblings who are older than me as well. So I'm the sixth of seven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did your father ever try and make it, or ever apologise to you or admit anything to you?
He once came into, so I used to hide in my room a lot, or hide in the backyard a lot. So I was always kind of out of the way.
Yeah.
And he would often come into my room with these profound statements and then leave. He came into my room once to tell me about some friend of his, some foul pedophile friend of his, because they're all pedophiles, and how this pedophile friend of his son had now hated him. And this poor friend was old and his son hated him. And he looked at me and he said, "You'll never hate me, will you?" And it was almost like, you're not allowed to hate me. You know, it's like a program. You're not allowed to hate me. And I remember saying something like, "Oh, I'd never do that," just to get him out of the room.
Yeah.
So there were things like that he would say. I think he did have alters. My older siblings and I call his one particular alter Evil Max, because he would get this look on his face and you knew that was what you were dealing with. He was, that side of him was out.
Yeah.
There were also sides that were kind of befuddled and lost and like a child. So I would assume he had some sort of severe trauma himself. And there's a fact that psychopaths, you can have a psychopathic tendency, but if you severely abuse a child with psychopathic tendencies, that's the one that's actually going to end up being a murderer or a torturer or a CEO. The majority of them are CEOs.
Yeah.
So he did say things at times.
So for you, how have you, I'm just thinking for our survivor family watching, how have you been able to emerge through this and recovered enough to be able to speak about it? What has helped you?
Oh gosh. Well, it's been a long process.
Yeah.
Speaking out has helped. Even though I was in the early days, like from 2006 until about 2012, I got extremely frustrated because every time I tried to make an allegation, police would laugh at me or abuse me or whatever they would do. That was actually a healing process because I was getting it all out. The writing it down, making sure I had multiple copies of all the allegations that I made. I felt like as I was doing this, I was amassing all of this evidence. And I was also able to talk to my siblings and other family members about what had happened. That was a real process of catharsis. I also met people along the way who'd gone through similar experiences. And so that was massive. And I would watch a lot of these sorts of shows and try to understand, oh my gosh, that happened to me as well. So I'm not crazy. And that helped immensely. I do a lot of body work. So I do yoga every day and breathe through those exercises. I have a chronic pain condition called fibromyalgia, which is very common amongst people who've been sexually abused as children or had severe childhood trauma, particularly in women. So around 75% of people with fibromyalgia have had some sort of severe childhood trauma.
Wow.
Very,
Wow.
very, very common.
Wow.
So in order to keep that at bay, I do these exercises, and that helps a lot as well.
Yeah.
But I would say mostly the speaking out and knowing other survivors, befriending beautiful souls like yourself, has made the major difference.
Yeah. And that, I think, as you're talking, I'm thinking, and that's the gift, isn't it, Rachel? Because if you can put words to it, it's not staying trapped in you.
Yes. Or going around in circles. That was another thing that would drive me crazy. The same flashbacks would come in over and over and over again. But I found eventually when I started to write it out, it stopped.
Yeah.
So that was amazing.
Yeah. Amazing. And what is your dad still alive today, or has he passed?
No, thankfully he died in 2017.
Yay. It sounds terrible saying yay, but yeah.
Oh, he can't hurt anybody now. But he was still hurting children.
Yes.
Even after allegations were made, he was still allowed to be around children.
Were children that he had under the house, were they ever released, or was it just going to be another mortality?
No, the two that I was aware of both died.
Yeah. So for you now, what's life like for you? What are you doing? What are you leading?
So one of the things that I've managed to do, again, major optimist, I've turned around the theta programming, the psychic programming that I was subjected to under MK Ultra mind control, and I do that now for a living. So I'm a professional psychic, and I actually find that really empowering, and I love the work because it's surprising how helpful that can be to people, especially if they're having psychic impressions and they don't know how to deal with it. So many tools you can use to keep scary things under the bed at bay. So that's my joy. I'm actually teaching psychic development now as well, which is another thing that it's an amazing progression. Just speaking out means you connect with more people, and then you have to use tools like Zoom. And then I realized that I could Zoom with a group of people, survivors, and then I recognized that I could do that if I wanted to do that in my work. So even though it all came from trauma, there's a positive that's come at the end of it, and that's what I've tried to do very intently throughout my life. I'm very, very stubborn, and I didn't ever want these creatures to have the best of me.
No.
And so I will be successful. I don't care how much they want me to fall into a heap or sit in the corner and suck my thumb. I refuse to do it.
Yeah.
I can understand why a lot of people do that after what we've been through, but I'm not going to let them make me do that. Oh God, no.
Have you? And I love the fact that you've been able to turn it around, and it actually feels joyful as you're using those words. It's got a lovely feel to it, and what a gift, because for survivors who struggle with that, sometimes the triggers can come and they can feel debilitating or, completely blindside. So I love the fact that you're able to do that work. And who better, Rachel? Who better?
Oh yeah. So I've had the whole gamut. I've had near-death experiences. I've had just about everything that you can experience. The satanic, stuff. I was used in rituals to communicate with these entities because obviously the adults around me didn't want to put themselves in that sort of danger. They used children to do it. Yeah. But through that process, I actually found I was quite strong, very capable, and had a lot of ability.
Yeah.
So, it's difficult. There's one aspect to being a positive person and still flourishing despite the abuse, and it's that I don't want other survivors to think that they have to do the same thing. Through the false memory syndrome foundation bullshit, and I hope you don't mind me using that language.
Go for it.
Oh gosh. One of the statements that one of the creatures made was that that supposedly a whole bunch of people who'd been abused had said that they were better off for it. And I don't ever want anybody to think, this is one of the ones that they use. I don't ever want anybody to think that I'm advocating for abusing children or that it was okay what I went through. I am just so incredibly stubborn that I will not allow my life to be ruined by what was done to me.
I love it. I love it. I love it. You are determined that your life will not be ruined by what was done to you. I so love that. And, and nor should it be. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking you're reminding me of Invictus, that beautiful poem. And
okay.
the master of your destiny, the captain of your soul.
I'll have to look at that one. That sounds lovely.
And good on you, Rachel, because although they could try and hurt you, attack you, deceive you, minimize you, try and destroy you, abuse you, sell you, traffic you, lease you, they couldn't actually touch this. And that's where the gift is. And I think it's so powerful for us as survivors to remember that whatever happens, we still have our beautiful spirit and we still have our minds. And that is special to us.
And just one thing that I wanted to mention, my partner mentioned this to me years ago. My God, it made a difference.
Yeah.
Every 10 years, you have replaced every single cell in your body. Every 10 years. There's not a single part of my body that was defiled.
Wow.
I'm fresh and new.
Wow.
And so there's no shame left there either. Yeah, so I hope that helps some people.
Well, you're on handing the shame back, my friend. So
yes, exactly.
never belong to you, belong to the monsters that chose what they did. And it's interesting because as you consider it, there was no choice for us as children and for survivors watching. In order to survive, we had to acquiesce. We could not afford to turn them bad at that time because as children, we need the adults around us to help us survive. So what we do instead is internalize and make ourselves bad because that's a safer option. So if we fast track now to adulthood, self-love can be really difficult for us to find. Yeah. What do you think about that, Rachel?
I had a self-affirmation list that I used to say many, many years ago, probably around 2004, 2005. And I found it again the other day. And it's amazing how I've achieved most of what I put on there. But one of those was that I love myself for who I am. And I don't care what anybody else's opinion is of me. And it's amazing that I had that then, because since about 2012 onwards, I've had really severe trolling, like paid trolls. And I know the particular abuser who's paying for it, even to the point of having a sponsored Facebook page. So it's sponsored, so that's the evidence that they're being paid. But I know that this one particular creature is being paid and has been paid for a long time. That's the sort of level of abuse that we have as survivors, especially if we're out in the public eye. They've got a lot of money, these people, especially my father's blackmail operations, he made a lot of money. So that's another way that they try and tear you down and destroy you. And again, the false memory foundation was used, as the reasoning behind it. I don't think it happens to every survivor, but it certainly happens to many of us who really sort of put ourselves out there.
Oh, look, I know it's happening to me, and not that this is about me at all. Yeah. But just alongside that, yes, I've had people threaten to take my Facebook page down, to attack me, to tell me that I'm stealing someone else's story. I have to say, Rachel, that always makes me laugh, because I think, who would want to steal my story? Like, why would you want that?
Well, that's a sad part of the survivor community. There are survivors who really feel like it's been taken from them. It's really sad, but the fact is that we've all got very common experiences.
Yeah. Well, and I think, to me, it doesn't actually matter whether it's 1 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 experiences. One of those 4 key trauma responses will be evoked. We will fight, flight, flee, or fawn.
Yes.
Or a combination of all 4. So to me, this comparative suffering that you and I hear about I always feel a little bit sad about that, because whether you're a survivor of one thing or many, it doesn't matter. The point is you're a survivor, and we love you and we welcome you. So, Rachel, just as we've got a few minutes left, is there anything that you would like to share with us that perhaps we haven't been able to cover off that you'd like to?
I think we're coming into a time, it seems very apparent that this sort of information's becoming mainstream. So I think we are winning the fight. And so it makes it worthwhile for those who are still in fear and don't want to speak out. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel like, you have to. There's enough now happening that it's wow, it's really gathering steam. So I think we're on the brink of a time where it's just impossible for people to ignore it any further. And I just want that to be heartening for those who've not been able to find their voice.
Yeah, no, I love that. And people watching, we've got the amazing Rachel to do it for us if we don't feel, on those days when we don't feel we can. So there's more and more of us, and I agree with you, Rachel. Any advice you would give our survivors, maybe survivors who, and not that they've struggled to tell people, but they come up a bit against the majority of people who are uncomfortable about hearing it, and so therefore would rather we just shut up and went away? Any advice for those survivors among us who maybe struggle with that at times?
Don't take that personally, because when you look at the cognitive dissonance is it's an intense and it's a natural thing that people have because it's just too much and they can't deal with it. And that is not your fault as a survivor. That is just they're not having resilience because they haven't been through what we've been through. I used to get very frustrated and annoyed with those people, but then I recognized that they're just not as strong as we are. So take it as a compliment that you can cope with it, that you can talk about it, even if it's not public, that you even have the strength to talk about it with somebody who can't deal with it. It shows that you're stronger than they are.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have to baby and mother and pander to these people, but that's just the way life is, unfortunately. Just wear it like a badge of honor that you've got the strength to even be able to talk about what's happened to you.
Yeah, I love that. And I think on that too, sometimes it's not that people don't want to be there, but as you've said, Rachel, they don't have that resilience.
Yeah.
And I always like to put yet.
Yeah.
Because anything's possible. For those that love you, they will try to find a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love is more powerful than anything. So, Rachel, where can people find you?
So if you just search up my name as it's spelt here, I'm on BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, although I'm trying to push people over to BitChute and Rumble because all I can really put up on YouTube now is little 1-minute statements to go and check out BitChute and Rumble. And I'm also on Telegram.
So do you have, okay, that's great. And have you written any books or produced any? Yeah.
So I've got a website, sixscience.com with a number 6. And that's a pun on Sixth Sense. It's not because I'm into the number 6. Just in case people are concerned. I always worry about that. People are going to say, oh, it's a number 6, and it's going to be triggering for people. That's where you can find out where I do my psychic work. I do have a book that I published in 2017 about my psychic journey or my belief system, but we've been going through the most amazing transformation over the last 4 years, so that a lot of the philosophy around soul colors, because I see auras, I've had to revise it. So I've had to take that down so I can revise it. So there'll be another a second edition coming out as soon as I can get myself around to doing it.
And it's got your name, or you've used a pen name for that?
No, it's actually got my name.
Oh, well done. Congratulations. Hey, Rachel, can you please stay right there?
Sure.
While I close out. So, audience, how lucky are we to have had Rachel Vaughan with us today? I've been wanting to get her on the show for a while now. I knew she'd be amazing, and guess what? She is. So a couple of things she said have stuck out with me, and one was that speaking out has helped. The writing, the talking to people, in her case it was siblings, but really just being able to release it and find the information and what she needed to prove her case really was quite powerful for her. So I think that's good for you guys to think about, because releasing it means it's coming from here, which is quite powerful. The other thing she said, which I absolutely loved, was she's determined not to have or be ruined, not to be ruined by what happened to her, not to have her life ruined. And I so love that, because look at that beautiful spirit that emerges and takes charge of what she is. And they've taken enough. Thank you. Goodbye now. So reclaiming and regaining and identifying with is beautiful. For all that Rachel is and for all that she does, I'm just so grateful. And as we finish, I just want to say to you, beautiful ones, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you.